Welcome back to another episode of the Capital H podcast. Really excited to dig into this one today, actually celebrating the 6-month anniversary of relationship between Deloitte and Dayforce. So I'm joined by Marc Harrison from Dayforce and Kurt Weber from Deloitte. Marc, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and share a little bit about your role and also Dayforce, the company?
Great. Thank you very much. Marc Harrison. I'm the Vice President of SI Alliances for Dayforce. Dayforce is an HCM player in the human capital management space. We deal with payroll, workforce management, time, attendance, performance, and talent. We also have the ability to deal with other components to enhance HR relationship endeavors within the organization.
Fantastic. Well, Marc, we're thrilled to have you on Capital H today. Kurt, would you like to introduce yourself as well to folks?
Sure will, Kyle. Thank you. So I'm Kurt Weber. I'm part of Deloitte's Payroll and Workforce Management Solutions practice, 30-plus year veteran, of the payroll industry, all at various roles in implementation. So at Deloitte, one of my responsibilities is to co-lead the global Dayforce practice along with Tom Joseph.
Awesome. Well, both super excited to dig in with you. And what I'd like to kind of start with a little bit is something that we were discussing a little bit earlier, that one of the things from a Dayforce business perspective that you've seen as this tremendous market opportunity right now is what's happening in the merger and acquisition space. And that being a big growth engine for when companies make the decision to then implement Dayforce. And so I wondered, Marc, maybe we can just start a little bit broadly for you. What are some of those workforce-related challenges that you're seeing companies face that is making them decide, hey, Dayforce is right for us as we move forward on our journey?
In the M&A space, one of the key factors, obviously, when you're bringing two organizations together is cultural integration. When you have disparate cultures and you can't formalize them into a unified operating unit, basically you're going to get dissension, you're going to get confusion, you're going to get misunderstanding of what the direction and guidance is of that organization. So you really want to enhance that ability by bringing all components together in the best way possible. There's also uncertainty and retention. People are coming into an organization and not understanding where they're going to be going, what their role is, what is the retention element associated with them. By bringing this all together in a kind of unified element to make sure that everyone is on the same page, proper communication, effective clarity in terms of where the organization is going, everyone is going to have a much better understanding of what the guidance and direction is of that organization.
Yeah, well, and Marc, you hit on, I think, the really big things that businesses are contemplated relative to the importance of talent, right, as such a key driver for many merger, acquisition, or divestiture decision points. And underpinning all of that is the fact that companies want to make sure they can legally employ folks in a compliant fashion, pay them, and manage the workforce, right? So you get those basics right, and that enables you to retain, attract, develop, and manage folks in a consolidated way. And so I think what you shared from a Dayforce focus perspective makes you all a tremendous platform and provider for organizations going through that type of business activity.
Maybe to build on that, these transactions, whether you're on the buying side or the selling side, come with a certain amount of anxiety to the employees who are affected. And the last thing that they're going to want to also have to deal with is any disruption in the services that they're used to being provided. You hit on a few of them already around payroll and remaining compliant and so forth. So one of the things that obviously attracted us to the Dayforce relationship was the ability to quickly stand up Dayforce, to scale it, so to make sure that there is no disruption in access to data, ability to make self-service requests and so forth, because those are the kind of things that are going to start to raise concerns, maybe even suspicions, as the employees who are affected start to think about where they're going to land in this new organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kurt, I think one of the things that you just touched on in that response is the speed to implement, right? And I know in a merger acquisition environment, when you're dealing with multiple different systems across the maybe two companies coming together, being able to get to a cleaner, integrated platform drives meaningful business value. So, Kurt, if you want to start and then Marc weigh in, can you speak a little bit about where at the joint kind of customer base within Deloitte and Dayforce or otherwise, we've seen that technology stack and particularly the human capital management layer, the workforce management platform. How does that play a role in kind of achieving some of that post-deal value during an integration?
Yeah, so depending upon the level of maturity the organizations are at with their tech stack as they come into the transaction, there's often some, can be some very difficult, sometimes contentious discussions about which system is ultimately going to win, right? If the buyer is using a different HCM platform than the seller, what's their pride of ownership? What is their contract situation? What are the types of things that are going to drive a decision on which technology ultimately becomes the system of record? And you have to also take into consideration things like your ability to service that technology. Do we need to think about a TSA? How does this affect our talent retention strategies and so forth? And so, again, as we think about how Dayforce sort of plays in that, the ability to kind of quickly expand the employee population, have that one integrated platform that brings core HR, brings WFM, brings payroll, benefits, et cetera, all together, kind of puts them in a unique position to sort of be positioned as that system of record as the transaction comes to completion.
And Kurt, just to add to that, like during integration, it gives you clear visibility into the headcount, into the organization, into the structure, compensation, benefits, and other components that are associated with that. Without that, you get confusion, you get misunderstanding, you get workforce data that is not aligned with where the organization wishes to go. And you want to streamline your HR processes is what's going to be happening here. You want to bring these units together, make sure that everybody's on the same page and driving forward.
Yeah. I mean, Marc, I think your point around the process streamline, I was hearing from an organization earlier today that said as they were embarking on a technology journey, they didn't even realize it was a manufacturing company. Even from like plant to plant, there were different processes, let alone from business to business, right? And you think of what that means from a complexity perspective and the opportunity to simplify things, make it that much easier for workers, leaders, managers to really focus on what matters most, which is like doing the work and driving tremendous business outcomes.
You want that centralized source of truth. And by bringing it all under one unit, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Marc, maybe I'll start with you based on what you just shared. Where have you maybe seen some organizations face the challenge of, okay, we have this intention, we want to go get to that one source of truth with our workforce technology, with our workforce management systems, but how do they bridge the gap maybe from intention into execution?
I think one common theme you'll probably hear from both Marc and I is keeping people at the center of these transactions. And I think sometimes clients, they'll go into this, like you said, with the intentions of creating a seamless technology transition. But often what gets lost is the prioritization of getting to the day one, the prioritization of recognizing the ROI that's been committed to the various stakeholders. And as a result, they overlook the need to really bring the right people into the activities that will allow the systems to potentially be merged and or replaced, depending upon what the strategy is that you're going to entail. So as we go through this, you're going to hear us talk about people a lot, and we really can't stress enough of how important it is to retain the right people with the right experience and the knowledge of how you got there. So you're not only bringing forward those processes and policies that have enabled you to be successful, but also take the opportunity to maybe evolve and transform and bring leading practices forward to the new organization.
And just to touch upon that, what happens is if organizations have a lack of people integration strategy, this is where things really begin to falter.
Yeah. Yep.
Because if they don't put them at the forefront, if they're just looking at it like they're bringing two organizations together and it's about the technology, everything else will get lost in the process. And then you're going to have maximum disruption along the way.
Yeah. And Marc, I know you have maybe an example to share about where you've seen that kind of more seamless experience that is not only about the technology, but certainly technology enabled to drive a strong M&A experience and outcome. Do you want to share a little bit about what that organization went through?
Sure. This is a large retail organization that has operations in the US, Puerto Rico, Canada, and other areas around the world. They basically were using the Dayforce platform right off the get-go, but every company that they would bring in, they would transition into Dayforce. That created an 83% reduction in time to integrate newly acquired entities. What would normally take 6 months was down to 2 months. by bringing all data into one central source.
Yeah.
Because we have a common platform and we can bring everything into one database, it really simplifies that aspect. Therefore, you got common information associated with payroll, benefits, and other components associated with that business.
Yeah. I'll want to reinforce folks, if they didn't catch that, 6 months down to 2 months from an integration timeline perspective. I think every organization that I've ever worked with who's gone through an M&A type of event would say, how can we do this faster? And that is a powerful real-time reduction.
And I just want to touch on this. This is an organization to which its population is very much a Gen Z audience. And that audience very much wants to use their cell phone for all sorts of communication. And because our ability to work with our solution on a mobile device, they were able to check their pay info, deal with scheduling conflicts, swap shifts easily, everything off of their device, not having to be on a laptop or in an office, just out on the street and adapting to their needs and wants at that point in time.
That's incredible. And I know the kind of Gen Z cohort at large, there's various data points and research that are out there that would say that population really values transparency from organizations, communication in a way that works for them wherever they are, whatever device they're on. And so hearing that story of Dayforce is enabling your clients, to meet your ultimate end customers, right? The workers, where they are, right? And in a way that then helps really drive value in maybe new and different ways.
Yeah. And Kyle, one unique thing that Dayforce brings to the table in these type of situations is called pay on demand.
Okay.
The ability for these individuals, these seasonal or shift workers, to be able to access pay at the end of their day rather than wait 2 weeks to get their pay stub certainly transforms the way businesses are operating. And that's another key component that Dayforce brings to the table.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Mark. I mean, as you think about this, the workers of today, they have such an expectation of the availability of data, not only in quantities, but in speed. They want it now. They want it accessible via a number of different modules or mobile devices and so forth. And they want it to be clear and concise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the story, Mark, that you shared around not only, I think, the business value of getting from 6 months to 2 months from integrations, but then where you're meeting the workers, that might be a great example of what a people-first M&A approach looks like, as one example of how one organization has done it. But maybe for other organizations contemplating M&A activity, whether they're current Dayforce customers or contemplating Dayforce in the future, can you share a little bit about what does a people-first M&A approach look like and how technology can play a role in making that a reality?
Kyle, thanks for that. I think what we're going to be looking at here is we have to be transparent. People first. They have to understand exactly what's going to be taking place, two-way communication. They have to have that ability to approach anyone in the organization to understand not only their role, where they're going, but where the company as a whole is going. Obviously, there's some things that are confidential that can't be shared. But when you bring the people into that journey, they feel that they are now part of the actual process.
Yeah.
I think, Mark, what you're alluding to is culture and change management can't be the last thing that you think of.
Yeah.
It's got to be the first. You have to take into account, how is this transaction going to affect the lives of the employees who are going to be impacted? And so how do we get out in front of that impact? How do we share information? How do we take the anxiety out of what can be a very stressful situation? And the way you do that is you over-communicate, you personalize, you make sure that to the extent that you can share what's happening, when it's happening, and what the outcomes are going to be, that's got to be a priority.
Yeah. Just to touch on that, like one of our key models was always communicate. That's the one factor you can never communicate enough. The other key thing is that when it does come down to people is an effective, proper retention program. Obviously, there's individuals in an organization that shine above others. Those are the key individuals that you want to keep going forward. And therefore, there has to be a proper retention program in place.
Yeah. And I think maybe I'll just call out for folks. It has been said throughout this conversation, but I want to just explicitly say it. A lot of what you're hearing from Kurt and Mark is there is a role technology plays to enable faster execution, getting to a seamless technology stack, getting to workforce data and insights to help enable business decisions. But ultimately, it's all based on are we doing right by our people? Are we doing right by our talent, right? And are we therefore helping retain the talent that has gone through the acquisition, whether they are coming in or they're within the company already and maybe a little uncertain as to what is the future of a combined business, right? And how do you then attract the new talent to say, hey, we just went through an acquisition. What does this mean? What's our candidate story out in the market? And therefore, so you have to be contemplating the entire perspective of topics. And maybe some of the power of Dayforce is the ability to spend less time focusing on, did we get the technology right? Because of that speed to implement, because of that speed to integrate. And you can spend that much more time focused on what really matters, which is attracting, retaining, and developing the people involved in the transactions environment.
You're so right, Kyle. I mean, Marc and I can work together and we can implement a Dayforce system at lightning speed that is highly effective, highly efficient, and very user-friendly. If the people have a bad experience, if the people's memory of the transaction was, it was not clearly communicated to them, the impacts were not understood, nobody's going to remember how good that implementation was. They're only going to remember the negative thoughts about how that transaction affected them.
Yeah, you have to build that comprehensive people integration strategy, but then you also have to invest in the right technology to take that forward.
Absolutely. So maybe a couple other questions for you both. One that'll stay a little on the M&A vein, and then I'll go even broader. If you had to leave maybe each of you listeners with one takeaway for what they should be thinking about relative to workforce management, workforce strategy in an M&A environment, what would it be?
I would say, don't underestimate the importance of having a very seamless workforce management, payroll, you can even throw HR strategy in there. Again, those are not the sexy applications out there, but they are the ones that absolutely impact every employee every day. And in large part, those will dictate how satisfied the employee is. There is some train of thought out there that an employee just has to get paid incorrectly one time, and they'll start looking for employment elsewhere.
Or you'll get that call volume to spike, like the minute pay is impacted. And to all the payroll professionals listening, thank you for every time you have gotten paid correctly. And I'm sorry that when an issue happens that might not be in your control, you hear from folks. But to your point, pay impacting, it's like the thankless job that is so incredibly important to everybody.
It just has to happen, right? It just has to happen, and it has to be right. That is the expectation in the world that the payroll professionals live in.
I'm telling you, streamlining HR operational processes is key as you're dealing with there's so many things that people have to deal with in an M&A process.
Yeah.
And the last thing they want to be worried about is, are there benefits in place? Are they getting paid on a weekly basis or biweekly basis, whatever it may be? Is the workforce management scheduling process happening? That's the last thing that they want to have to worry about. So when you bring everything together under one unified operating solution and you're driving forward to success, then everybody else is going to be driving towards success.
Awesome. And maybe a broader question from each of you. What's one thing that you each think folks should just know about Dayforce looking forward?
I think that the Dayforce tech stack is very, I would say, at the head of its class as far as its integratability. So Marc kind of referenced the pay on demand, the constant calculation functionality that exists, the ability to have that full integration of core HR, of benefits and payroll and so forth, which allows the nimbleness, allows the efficiency and the implementation of it, which, not only plays very strong in the M&A world, but just in general where a transition is necessary.
Like Dayforce, we make people's work life better. That's what our goal is, and that's what we do. We're a single platform, single database. We deal on a global basis. We can work within 150 different countries around the world from a payroll side. The CFO only has to look at one database, not multiple payroll systems. It really simplifies the whole event of the human capital component within a business.
That's fantastic.
In closing, Kyle, thanks for the opportunity, obviously to talk about Dayforce, M&A, and in general. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, Kurt and Marc, thank you both for joining. It's a pleasure to get to learn more myself about Dayforce and the tremendous business value it can drive. And I think, Marc, that story about 6 months to 2 months for integrations that you shared is a tremendously powerful one. And I have to imagine there will be companies knocking on your door to say, tell me more about that.
I hope so, Kyle. We'll be part of that whole process of bringing the people together during an M&A, and we look forward to continuing working with Deloitte. Awesome.
All right. Well, Capital H listeners, thank you so much for joining Kurt Weber, Marc Harrison, sharing a story about how you need to really contemplate the importance of workforce management, workforce strategy in an M&A environment, and especially the tremendous value if you've got the technology stack right and the simplified processes, you can focus on what's driving the business value, the people. Thank you again. You can reach out to Capital H for more insights and perspectives or to get in touch with Marc and with Kurt. And stay tuned for more coming from Capital H with more stories like these throughout the year. Thanks all.
This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, please go to deloitte.com/about.